Okay, let's complete the heat transfers by conduction. So again, the heat can transfers by the conduction. The heat can transfers by the conductions in solid object or through the solid objects from one part to another, from the part is higher temperature to the part which is lower temperature. So again, if you touch a metallic spoon, this metallic spoon are put it in a hot cup of tea or a hot water, so you can feel warm. Why you can feel warm or why it becomes hot? Why the metallic spoons becomes hot? Because the heat transfers from one part to another. The heat transfers from the higher temperature to another temperature, like this. So the heat transfers through a solid object or through the solids in the metallic spoons by conduction from the part of the higher temperature, here, the red one is a higher temperature, so it transfers to the blue one. This is the lower temperature or the end of the metallic spoon. Now we'll talk about the transferring of the heat by here conduction. What does it mean by the transferring of the heat by the conduction? Like this. If you touch a pan, a hot pan, so the heat transfers from the higher part, the higher temperature, to the lower temperature. So if you touch the handle of the pan, so the heat transfers from the higher temperature to the lower temperature. So the transfer of the heat by conduction. What does it mean by the transfer of the heat by conduction? It's the transfer of the heat through some solid object, through the solid objects, from the part of the higher temperature to the lower temperature. Karim. Karim, this part is clear?
ما فهمتش بس مش حاجة.
What?
لما كان بيقول it is the transfer of the heat through a solid object from the part with
the higher temperature to the part of the lower temperature. This pan, ya Karim, this pan, I put it in the oven or I heat this pan, okay? So the pan here in this part is a higher temperature because I put it on the heater or oven. So the heat can transfer through this object from the higher temperature or from this part to the handle. It will transfer to the handle, to the end one. So if I touch this handle, I feel hot. Why I can feel hot? Because the transfer of the heat through the solid object from the part of the higher temperature to the part of the lower temperature. Karim, clear this point?
Yes.
Okay, thank you, Karim. Nijar,
What?
Clear this point? The transfer of the heat by the conduction. Why the heat can transfer by the conduction? Because the heat transfers through some solid object, From what to what? From the higher temperature to the lower temperature. Yes, from the higher temperature to the lower temperature. So the heat can transfer through the solid object from the higher temperature to the lower temperature.
Lower temperature.
Okay, thank you, Nijar.
Yeah.
Where is Rahma and Iman?
They didn't even attend any
مش عارفة يا
lesson.
مس، مش راضيين يردوا، مش بيدخلوا الميتنج.
Okay, because this lesson I didn't explain this lesson in the school again. Okay, Nijar. Okay, thank you, Marie. Okay, number 2, the heat can transfer by convection. What's Salsabil? What do you need, Salsabil?
Miss, I can't understand this part.
The heat, the transferring of the heat by conduction. By conduction?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Again, Salsabil. The heat can transfer by the conduction through what? Through the solid objects. Okay, concentrate with me again, middle one. The ways of the heat transfers. There are some ways to transfer the heat. There are 3 ways to transfer the heat. Number 1, conduction. Number 1, conduction. What does it mean by conduction? توصيل. Number 2, convection. Convection. And number 3, radiations. By conduction, the heat can transfer by the conduction through the solid object. Through the solid objects. Like if you touch this pen. When I touch this pen, where is the higher one? The higher temperature one? The pen. The pen, I put this pen on the oven, or I put this pen on the heater. So the pen is higher temperature object. If you touch the handles, if this handles, it's not made of wood or made of plastic, made of aluminum, or these pans and also the handle made of aluminum. So if I touch the handle, so I can feel hot. Why you can feel hot? Because the heat transfers from the pan to the handles. Because the heat transfers from the pan to the handles. Here, if imagine this is pan or this is handle of the pan. So here, the higher temperature object, so the heat can transfer from the red one to the blue one. So the end of the handle. Why? Because the heat transfers between or through solid objects. By conduction. By conduction. معناها ايه الكلام ده يا ميدل وان؟ ان الهيت بتبتدي تحصل لها ايه؟ transferring بيحصل لها transporting from the higher temperature to the lower temperature. من الدرجة اللي أعلى للدرجة اللي أقل. فبالتالي الهيت انرجي هتوصل من البان اللي كانت سخنه دي وتبتدي تنتقل بيحصل لها ان الحراره دي هتمشي لحد ما توصل عند الهاندل. So if you touch this handle, I feel hot. This is clear, Salsabil? Salsabil, this part is clear? I ask you to unmute. What, عمر؟
بس لو سمحتي، هو ينفع أسأل سؤال؟
Can you ask me?
هو ينفع أقول مثلا مثال للراديشن وحضرتك تقولي ده صح ولا لأ؟
ماشي اتفضل، بس احنا لسه ما خدناهوش، بس ماشي اتفضل معاك.
واحنا بس يعني مثلا الراديشن ده مش لما مثلا
radiations انا هقول لك انا حاجه سهله خالص. radiations the heat transfers from the sun to our body by what? by the radiations. What does it mean by radiations? Because,
صح؟
yes, because the heat rays or the heat energy of the sun transfers to our body. We can feel warm. هل انت عامل touch للsun? Your body touch the sun? No. No. But the heat of the sun transfers to our body through vacuum, through the air, through non-material media. So this is called radiation. وده معنى كلمة radiations. Rays of the sun or the heat of the sun. Clear يا عمر؟
Clear. شكرا.
Okay, thank you يا عمر. So number 2, the heat transfers by convection. Heat transfers by convections through what? Heat transfers by convections through liquids. Through liquids. In liquids or gases. What? Or where? Where the hot molecule have less density rises upwards. And the colder molecules have more density, so it falls down. Like here, if you heat heat some of water. So the heat or the hot water, it will rises up. It will rises up. Why? Because the hot water have less density than the colder by the cooler water or cold water. The hot water have less density than the cold water. So the hot water, it will rises up, and the cold water, it will fall down. And also again the cold water it heated, then its density become less, so it rises upwards. Then the cold water then sinks. So the heat transfers by the convection through liquids, in the liquids and gases. Where the hot molecule, you have to keep in your mind, the hot molecules of liquids or air have less density. The hot molecules have less density. And cold molecules have higher density or more density. So the hot molecules rises up because they have less density. والحاجة الأقل هتطلع لفوق ولا هتنزل لتحت؟ density. لا، لما الدنسيتي هتزيد so the cold molecules will falls down, but the hot molecules will rises up. So this is called convections. So the hot molecules will rises up, but the cold molecules will sinks to be heated again. So we have some live applications about the heat transfers by the convections through the air or through liquids or air. Like number 1, the freezers. The freezer is found at the top of the fridge. Why? Why in the refrigerator or the fridge, our fridge or our refrigerator, the freezer is found at the top? Why? ليه ما عملوه في ليه دايما يحطوا الفريزر في التوب؟ يحطوا الفريزر because when the air is cold, its density increases. The density, the cold air, so its density increases. So it will fall down to cool the food in the refrigerator. Then The hot air have less density, have low density, so it will rises up to be cold again, and become cold air. Then it have more density, so it will falls down to cool the food in the refrigerator or in the fridge. Then the hot air become low density, it will rises up to be cold again, and so on and so on and so on. So the freezer is found at the top. Also, if you ask yourself why the air conditioner found at the top of our room, why we put air conditioner at the top of our room? Because this point, or this is live applications about the convection or the transferring of the heat by the convection through liquids and through airs. Also because that's why, because the air, when air it's cold at the top of our room, so its density increases, so it will falls down. It falls down, so the hot air become low density, so it will rises. It will rises up to be cold again, That's why we put the freezer at the top of the fridge, and also we can put the air conditioner at the top of our room. Another live application about the heat transfers through convections, why we put the electric heater at the bottom of our room. We put the electric heater at the bottom of our room. Why? Because when the air around the heater here, when the air around the heater is heated, so its density increases. Its density decreases. Its density become less density. So it will rises up. It will rises up to warm our room. So the cold air with the higher density or with high density falls down to be heated again from the heater, and also so on. So this is called convection. The hot air or the hot air which has less density, it will rises up. Less density will rises up, and the cold density it will high density. The cold air with the high density it will falls down to be heated again.
Miss,
What's مالك؟ مالك؟
ايه ميس،
What do you need?
كان في صدى صوت كده عند حضرتك، الكلام بسمعه مرتين.
Okay, again. Repeat it again. Repeat this point again. This is live applications. Okay, this is live application about the heat transfers by the convection. You have to know, you have to put it in our head that the hot air or hot water becomes less density, so it will rises up, and the cold one become higher density, so it will falls down. It will fall down. So the live application, number one, we put the freezer in the freezer at the top of the fridge. Why we put the freezer at the top of the fridge? Or why we hold the air refrigerator at the top of our room? Why? Because the air, when the air is cold from the top of the room, its density will be increased. Density will be increased, so it will falls down to cool the food in the refrigerator. So, and the hot air becomes low density, so it rises to be cold again, and so on and so on. The hot energy, the hot air becomes, rises up, and the cold, or the cold air rises down or falls down, because the density will be increased. And the electric heater is placed down on the ground. Why we put the heater on the ground at the bottom of our room? Because when the air around the heater, when the air like here around the heater is heated, so its density decreases. Its density become low density, so it will rises to warm the room. While the cold air, that high density, falls to be heated again, and so on. This is the life applications about the heat transfers by the convection. The last one is the heat transfers by radiations. Heat transfers by the radiations through objects, from one object to another, without need to any material medium. Without material medium to throw the heat, or to flow the heat, or transfer the heat. Like what? Like the sun. Like the sun. The heat of the sun. The heat of the sun. The heat transfers from the hot object to another without any need for a material medium. Like the heat of the sun, we feel warm. Why? Because the heat of the sun. So the heat of the sun transfers through the vacuum, or through the air, without any material medium to transfer the heat. So we have two life applications about this point. Number one, we wear a dark cloth in winter. Why we wear a dark clothes in winter? To absorb the heat of the sun. Why we wear a dark cloth in the winter? Why? To absorb all the heat of the sun, to warm your body, to absorb the heat of the sun, because the heat transfers through air or through vacuum without any material medium to transfer. And number two, we wear the light clothes. In the summer, we wear light clothes. Why we wear light clothes? We wear light clothes to reflect the sun rays outside, to reflect the sun rays from our body, so you feel not the heat, or you feel decrease in our heat. Okay, so if I make a revision about these three ways of the heat transfers, the heat transfers by the conduction, and heat transfers by convection, and also heat can transfers by radiations. Heat transfers by conduction through the solid object, from the higher temperature object to the lower temperature object. Like if you touch a pan, or if you hold the handle of the pan. And number two, the heat transfers by convection through gases and also through liquids. And we have two live applications about this point. Like we put the freezer at the top of the fridge, and we put the heater at the bottom of our room. Number 3, the transfer of the heat by radiation through material medium or non-material medium. The heat can transfer without any medium, like the heat of the sun will reaches to our body. So we must wear heavy clothes or black clothes in winter to absorb all the heat of the sun. And in the summer we wear light clothes to reflect the heat. Okay, I stopped till this point. Anyone need to ask me about anything? I unmute all of you. Wait.
بس احنا ينفع نفتح المايك عادي.
Okay, unmute all of you. Anyone need to ask me anything? Because I didn't explain this part in the school again. I complete the last part in this lesson. Again, middle one. Anyone need to ask me anything?
لا مش.
حمزة, أحمد, كريم, لجين.
نعم يا مس.
سلسبيل, رؤى, عمر,
لا فاهم.
نيجار. All of you
No.
need to ask me anything.
فاهمين يا مس.
Okay. إن شاء الله on Wednesday we will have a quiz on the sheet that I هيكون إن شاء الله عندي كويز بإذن الله. تمام, على الشيت اللي احنا أخدناه على
Wednesday ولا April؟
Wednesday in our session. In our session. Okay, goodbye, middle one. Thank you, goodbye. See you soon. Thank you, goodbye.
باي باي.
Bye.
صباح.
Bye.